So hello everybody.
Hi guys.
Hey.
Hey.
Welcome everybody. We're really happy to have Steve Hunt as a guest tonight. Hey Steve, so great you're here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great, we can do this over the internet. I don't have to fly to Germany. I can stay here
Exactly.
in my studio.
Yes, live
Very
from
nice.
the East Coast, guys.
Yes, so Oliver and I, we do this for, I think this is it's possibly the ninth show we do.
Oh, okay.
Talk about jazz, fusion music. Sometimes we present our own tunes and we kind of go through them and explain what we thought we did and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
Sometimes we talk about albums, vinyl,
There you go.
old days or whatever. There's always a topic.
exactly.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, especially the fusion music is what I grew up listening to, and it's kind of still what I do. So
Yeah.
it's great. It's great you're doing this and kind of exposing more people, to
Right.
this music.
Yeah, that's really our goal because sometimes at live shows we meet people and they say, "Wow, I didn't even know that this music exists anymore. Like people play this." So,
Yeah,
and we do.
yeah, we actually do. Yeah, we're here, we're around, we're alive.
Yes.
Sometimes live.
You
For
know.
a few people. Yeah, that's that is a sort of an issue with a lot of styles of music like fusion and jazz, classical. It's not a large portion of the population. So I think sometimes I think the way fusion came about was in the early days. If you remember, it started when the jazz guys wanted to try something different, and they were really into Jimi Hendrix and what Woodstock was happening, and they're like, okay, we need to get some electronic instruments, and Miles pulled up John McLaughlin and said, can you play a distorted guitar like this guy, and then they started doing what they thought was going to be rock and roll, but it really just turned into this other kind of music, so. So I did at that point. It did reach a larger audience, especially in the '70s. So, and that's the decade that I grew up in the '70s.
Right. Yeah. So you already enjoyed listening to what was some of the first bands that you really enjoyed listening to that were in that genre?
Yeah. So, before that, I was definitely into the rock and roll. So I was listening to Creedence Clearwater, Jimi Hendrix, and my older brother had these records of all these. I loved Grand Funk Railroad, and I played guitar a little bit. I loved that stuff. And then my older brother he started getting into this other kind of field in rock and roll music, which was like back then. They call it progressive rock now. So it was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and then Yes. And then so I kind of gravitated to that, and so I was listening to Rick Wakeman and Keith Emerson and all that amazing stuff, and all those synthesizers were like coming out.
Which is pretty close to fusion music anyway, right?
It was really and it was really close. And then my dad was a bebop saxophone player, so around my house was being played there was Charlie Parker and John Coltrane and Stan Getz and Billie Holiday and all those big bands, Woody Herman, Stan Kenton, and that's what was going on in my house. But I was a kid. I was into Jimi Hendrix and then into like this progressive rock stuff, and my dad, he wasn't really getting me to like listen to his music, it's like old bebop stuff. I didn't understand it. And so he came home one day and he had some records he just got, and it was Light as a Feather and some Headhunters and some Weather Report. And that was sort of the beginning of when I made that transition from the progressive rock, and then I heard this other music from these guys. I didn't really know who they were. I didn't know Chick or Joe Zawinul or
Were
George
you into
Benson.
Were you into Blood, Sweat and Tears?
My older brother had a band when I was a kid, and he played B3 organ, and he had a band with horn section, and they played Chicago and Blood, Sweat and Tears and all that stuff from 1969, 1970. So I heard all that stuff. So it was really, I kind of, I loved all that that kind of music, kind of rock, and then of course growing up in a jazz household, it kind of sounded similar to me, the jazz stuff that my dad was doing and the rock stuff I listened to, and no, nobody called it fusion back then, you know. It was just like stuff people were doing, and then but when I heard Headhunters and Weather Report and Return to Forever, I was just like, this is the stuff I want to. So that's when I really kind of got into it, probably 1971 or 1972. I was like 13 or 14 in junior high, and that's when I really just jumped in and became the fusion guy, you know. That's all I wanted to do. And I was talking to somebody the other day, one of my students, and back then there were no teachers there was nobody to teach you how to play fusion, right? It was just a new music. And that's where I learned from the records, those guys, you know. And then I finally started hearing like Mahavishnu Orchestra with John McLaughlin and Jan Hammer and all those guys. And then it was just a great decade of just new music happening. And for me, it was exciting because they had the synthesizers were coming out, and these guys were playing all this stuff, and I just wanted to be part of it. So I started bands, and in my high school we did that stuff. I got my first Fender Rhodes, you know, with a wah-wah pedal.
Okay.
And I finally
were you a Moog guy or an ARP guy?
I was a Moog guy. There was a great thing that happened. This is early in the 70s. I forget when that Moog D came out. I think Moog did that sort of small model, that Model D, like in the late 60s or something, or early 70s. And I went to one summer. I was in 7th grade or around that time, and my parents sent me to a Salvation Army summer camp. You know, you go off to camps, and so I didn't really want to go, but I just went. And then you know what they do? You go canoeing and climbing ropes and hiking and all the stuff I really didn't like to do, but I'd go. You know, it'd be a way to get out of the house and go somewhere. So so one of the camp directors had a mini Moog. And he brought it to the camp, and he would set it on the stage with probably a Fender Twin amp, and he had this Moog there, and you know, and I found it, and so I asked, hey, can I play this thing? And he said, yeah. So instead of climbing ropes and canoeing and falling in the water and you know, playing kickball, I would just sneak off. I would just go to this stage, and I would just play this mini Moog every day for the week, you know. And I would just sit there and like turn knobs and play and hear these amazing sounds coming out of this Fender Twin amp, and just play around with it. And I think that might have been around the same time I heard Rick Wakeman playing with Yes, and he had a bunch of those Moogs and that kind of sound. So I knew that sound. And then I would just play and mess around with it So I got back from the camp, and my parents were like, "Oh, how was the camp?" I'm like, "It was the best camp ever." They're like, "Oh, great!" But they had no idea. I just like played the Moog the whole week, you know.
Great story.
Yeah, so that's how I got exposed to the Moog. So I was like, I love that sound. And then when I came to Boston, I purchased my first mini Moog, and I had that, and also, so I was a Moog and a Oberheim guy. That's what I had my first Oberheim. And
what, the 4-voice or what?
The 4. In fact, I still have it over here. It's like I'm trying to revive it. It's dead, but I'm trying to revive it. I'm rebuilding it, and it was the OBX. So it was that. You're probably free. It was that synthesizer right after Joe Zawinul and Lau Mays had that Oberheim with the big modules. Do you remember the ones they were using? It's a big, giant Oberheim that each module was a voice. And then the next one he built was the OBX, and that's the one I have. That's the first one I got. I could play 4 notes, and it was revolutionary. And in Boston, I had that keyboard, and my other friend was a Prophet guy, so he had a Prophet, and I had an Oberheim. So and then he had he was Prophet and ARP guy, and I was Mini Moog and Oberheim. So we had this kind of a competitive thing going with sounds and patches and all that stuff. So it was a really exciting time. It was so new to be able to play multiple voices at once, you know. there was a great album in the 70s that I used to listen to all the time. It was a Gino Vanelli album called Just of the Gemini. I don't know if you know that record. And Joe Vanelli, his brother, did all the synth work on it. And you hear these big synth pads and synth stuff happening, but it was before they had polyphonic synths. And so I researched into that, and the way he did that is he had those mono synths like Moogs and I think Roland. There's a couple other mono synths, and he would just
Stacked.
orchestrate everything, and he would just record all the voices. So it sounded like polyphonic synths, but he recorded each different, like a separate track for each one, and it sounds so huge. And
Yeah, of course.
and so all those string patches you hear on there are like individual multiple tracks of individual notes, and it just sounds amazing. Yeah, it's amazing sound. So I tried to do that, like kind of old school style. It takes so much time. I'm like, the heck with it. I'll put on my patch. Okay.
Isn't it really amazing that at that time, keyboards like a 4-voice Oberheim, which is a behemoth, were considered transportable? A compact keyboard?
Well,
we used to think about them.
You had a choice between that or Fender Rhodes and B3. So,
Yeah, that was
it
a
was
big
less
one.
yeah, I mean, even in the 80s when I traveled and stuff, I would go to the airport and I would have my big road case of the Oberheim and big road case of the DX7 and a big road case of my Oberheim expander and all this stuff. It was portable. It was big, and a little overage weight and overage baggage that he would charge. But it was cool to be able to take all that stuff, So now I just I know I'm jumping ahead, but now I'm just using MainStage with all my plugins, and I have all the old synths in them, like the Moog synths and the Oberheims and all the patches I write, and I just put them in my homemade Hackintosh computer I built, and I just take that. I come to Europe and I have that and a little keyboard. I'm all set, So things
I did that in the 90s with a Roland JV 1080 with all the sounds on them organized in performances, and I'd just hire any MIDI keyboard I could get.
Right. Yeah, and that's the way it is. It's revolutionary. So that happened in the 80s, and it was really, really cool to have that, But I can imagine the road crews back in the 70s must have been a nightmare,
It was normal.
The stuff never worked. My OBX never worked, Like on the tour. I'm jumping ahead again, but like in the 80s, I started playing with Stanley Clarke. I'd go on tour, and I brought that thing with me. And I had, before each concert, I had to take out those 4 screws on the lid, because like during the concert, like things would just start acting up. I had to lift up the lid of the Oberheim and push down on the cards because they were probably cold joints, on the solders. And I had to push on it and it'd start working, and then I'd play, and then it'd start messing up. I had to lift it and push on the thing. And
I sold an Oberheim SX in the early because I couldn't seem to get it in tune. It was never in tune, never, ever. So it had a huge sound, but I couldn't use it.
The funny thing is, they build that into the computer plugins now to make it out of tune, so it sounds authentic.
Yeah.
I love that part.
A function I don't really need, actually.
So anyway, so I mean, I kind of went off the.
Oh, that's really interesting.
There, but in the 70s, that's sort of when. That's how I kind of got into listening to this style of music, and I just, I mean, I don't. It wasn't like I made a conscious decision like this is what I'm going to do. It's just it was just something I really gravitated toward. I just loved the mixing of the stuff I listened to before, like the rock and roll, like Jimi Hendrix and rock and roll, and then I loved the mixing of all the synths that I listened to with the progressive rock guys, and then to hear all those jazz harmonies too that I was listening to from my dad's records. I'm like, it was like this world of everything together, And of course, guys like Jan Hammer and John McLaughlin, those guys started incorporating sounds from Africa and from India and South America, and all those sounds came up into this music, and it was just it was just amazing. If when
Yeah.
like
The
all the
beginning
stuff.
of world music, actually.
Yeah, it really became like a sort of like, I guess, the first world music sort of, and everything was just mixed together. And so yeah, so I like that aspect. I was also a classically trained pianist, so I took classical piano lessons. So I was playing Bach and Chopin, not very good, but I was playing all that stuff, and so I loved the classical music, and I still play classical music today. Still teach it, and I still practice it, and I still take lessons from all these classical heavies and at the
I
conservatory.
remember I think that was when we were still in Boston. You were taking some master classes at NEC or something. Is that
And
right?
yeah, and I'm still part of the class. I'm still doing it.
Wow. So I thought that was so amazing. That you just keep, you know, you keep learning and it's that's really amazing.
Well, that was the cool thing about growing up. My mom is a pianist, and she's a piano teacher, and then my dad was a jazz saxophone player, but he grew up. He went to school for he was a classical clarinetist major or whatever. That's what he was doing. So he actually did both worlds, and so I would during the week I would go to Houston and hear the Houston Symphony do Beethoven or whatever, and then the next night we'd be at the La Bastille Jazz Club down in the smoky basement in Houston, listening to like Cannonball Adderley or whoever these guys my dad would take me to. So I grew up going down both paths. So it was just part of me. So I later, like in the '90s, he actually did both. I started taking classical lessons again. I never stopped. So
Cool, cool. Yeah. So after you heard all this like early fusion bands and when came the moment where you said, okay, I wanna study music, I wanna go to college or something, or was that something that just slowly developed, or that was in your mind already like early on?
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's kind of weird. 'Cause I don't know if I ever consciously said like, okay, I'm going to be a musician, and this is what I'm. It was just something it became just a part of me, and it's just what I did, and I kind of just took on. Uh, my mom said it was like, it's a gift from God that I can do all this improvisation. I don't, but it was just something I did, and I didn't think about it that I could improvise. I never said, oh, I want to learn how to improvise. It was just I wanted to do what I heard on those records.
Hmm.
Uh, so I wanted to find a way just to get out in the world and do it somehow. And I grew up in a little small town in South Texas, and there wasn't a lot of stuff happening down there. It's like mostly country western down there. But
Yeah.
but in my house with my dad and my parents, we had a lot of jazz, and so that's I remember in my senior year in high school, I was going to go to North Texas University and a lot of great. I think Lyle Mays had gone there, and
Hmm.
Right.
a lot of great, a lot of some Berklee teachers I perform with and play with here. They graduated from there. It's a great school, and I knew about that program there. So that's where I wanted to go. So I drove up there and talked to the guys, and then I had a really good friend of my dad that was a saxophone player and a chemical engineer also. But he was a great musician, and he started taking this correspondence course. Sort of, we would call it online now, but they had to do it through the mail. And he started taking this arranging course, and he did arrangements, and he would get this assignment, and he would do the arrangement, and then he would send it off. And so my dad asked him, like, where are you getting these things from, and where's this at? And he was getting it from Berklee. And so Berklee had this sort of correspondence thing. And so the arranger teachers at Berklee would do a mail thing. So he took this course and he learned arranging and that stuff through this course at Berklee. And that's where I first heard about Berklee in Boston. And then my dad said, well, you should check out this school. And so it's a little harder to check things out back then. I couldn't just Google. So I did look them up and got some information from them in the mail, and I'm like, that's where I want to go. This is the place I want to be. I just heard stories,
Uh-huh.
and it turns out that during that decade there were so many musicians that we hear about today that were coming through that program and through Boston, like Vinny
Mm.
Colaiuta and Alan Pasqua and I think John Schofield came through, and
uh,
all these artists. And when I came to Boston, Mike Stern was here, and
uh,
Tommy Campbell. All these guys were. So it was a really great time to show up. But that's how I wound up at Berklee. It's just, and the other thing, nothing against Texas, but it was just, I looked on the map and I'm like, this is a long way from Texas, and that's North Texas was not far enough away. So
okay.
this is really far away from Texas. So I
Right.
I got on the plane and never came back, except to get my wife. I dragged her up here. So
Great.
yeah. So that's how I wound up at Berklee, and it was really great. And just a really great experience coming to Boston. And
Sorry to interrupt you, but we have a
yeah.
question from Stefan Roos. He wants to know if you've ever played the mellotron. Did you ever play a real mellotron? I never did.
No, I don't think I ever played it. I don't think I ever came across one. I wanted to, because my hero Rick Wakeman had 3 or 4 of them on stage, and I learned later that he had 3 or 4 of them on stage because it was a possibility only one would work out of the 3. That's why he had 3 of them on stage.
Mm-hmm.
They were notorious for breaking down, but I never got to play one, and it was a fascinating instrument with all the tapes and all that stuff. And then you hear the Beatles using it, and then Rick Wakeman used it on all those sounds he had going on with the flutes and the strings and all that
Actually, I
stuff.
remember myself as quite a boy at the Frankfurt Music Fair, trying one out. And I was surprised how hard it was to play. I guess because you had to move those tape heads towards the tape inside, and you
And
could
they had to
hardly
roll and go back. And you could
hardly
only hold
play.
it for 17 seconds or something like that. I
Yeah,
think
you
it was
could
the
hardly
timing.
play a run on it. It was really it was really heavy.
Yeah, I always like going back. There's a bunch of YouTube videos you can go back and watch people the early advertisements, the adverts in England, and somebody would play it, and it was amazing. The techno, he had all these bands and different rhythm sections and sounds all in all this tape happening. It was like, and it just created this. I guess it was originally created for maybe studio use or like for home use. Somebody could play sounds and they could feel like they have a band in their house, But it wound up in sort of like the Hammond B3. It had its first intentions being built, but it wound up doing other things. So it wound up in all these rock and roll bands and fusion bands and progressive rock bands, and we heard it in a whole different light than say somebody's living room playing little folk songs or whatever. That's how they advertised it that way, but it wound up doing something different.
There's a great book on the Hammond, and I've read that Lawrence Hammond, the inventor himself, was quite infuriated because all the black and all the rock guys used his Hammond, which was only for what, church use, I guess.
Yeah, it was supposed to be for home and church use with nice and little delicate sounds and all that. And next thing you know, you go to a gospel church in New York and they had that thing, and it was supposed to replace the pipe organ, but
and he didn't.
These people had a different thing, and all of a sudden they were just doing this stuff, and then it wound up on a Deep Purple record, with distortion. And those guys put up with like four Leslies behind it, just cranking with tubes and so I have a B3 now. Actually, I got one. I turn it on and play it all the time. But they usually, I think tube amps were the same way. They weren't supposed to be distorted. And then some kid turned it up too much, and they're like, "That's cool," and it became distorted, and they're like, and so it's usually what happens, So with different things, it's people invent something, and it's people have other ideas how they want to use it. So that's kind of cool thing about music and art,
Sure.
Never know what's going to come out of it. So
Yeah.
I always like the story of Joe Zawinul when he would get these synthesizers, he would just initialize the whole board, the whole thing.
Ah.
And then he would start from scratch, like
Wow.
create sounds, it's like, I'm like, wow, I'm really lazy. I would take what's there and I would tweeze a little bit, but he just started from scratch and like rebuilt. And that's how he got all those amazing, really cool sounds that he had. So anyway, but
Wow. Yeah.
Right. When I started playing in the studios in Munich, that was around 1982, 1983. I
Yeah.
found my way in as a programmer first and not as a young player because the elder players would never touch the controls. They only played the keyboard. So as soon as they wanted to come up with some sound or even edit a sound, they were lost. They didn't
Yeah.
know what the controls did. So, well, that's how I sneaked in actually.
Yeah, and actually there was a lot of people were working and doing that, like in studios and stuff, and
Mhm.
they knew how to program and do all the patches and the Moogs and the ARPs and stuff. And I took a class at Berklee from they did have a synth class, a synth department. Well, I don't know if they had a synth department, but they had a synthesizer class, and so they taught me how to use the ARP 2600. So I kind of learned early on how to uh, you know, get the ADSR happening and the filters and patch things and kind of do all that stuff. So I kind of learned that early on, which was helpful,
Hmm.
for the early synths. You had to create a sound,
So
even
how
even
did,
the, yeah, even the Oberheim had it. You had to do some work to get sounds.
of course, how did you find your way into Allan Holdsworth band then?
Yeah. So yeah, it's well, yeah. So after I left Berkeley, I'm actually a Berkeley dropout, which is I'm not totally proud to say that, but it was kind of a badge of honor back then. So after I dropped out, and then they hired me. So now I think, but somehow I conned them into thinking like, hey, but anyway, so and they brought that up to me too when they were interviewing me. They said, you never graduated. I said, yeah, but just look at the other stuff I did. Don't. So, but after I left Berkeley, the thing was is during that time, a lot of people that were doing performance majors like myself, we never stayed to graduate because opportunities came, and then your whole idea was just to go out and play anyway. So that's kind of what happened, and I just started meeting people and the people I knew at Berkeley, and we had bands, and I first started playing with Randy Roos, which is a local guy in Tiger Okoshi, and Randy Roos had Victor Bailey was the bass player in that band, and one of my tunes, my record, is dedicated to Victor. We used to play that tune with Victor, and then it was just kind of word of mouth, and I wound up doing this other thing, and I played with some guys in New York, and then I became the musical director for this this kind of a show. It was kind of a show, but if there the promoter had four artists on a show, but he would use one band, and I was the musical director for it. And Jimmy Earl played bass, and then I had a drummer. And on the show, and one night would be like Freddie Hubbard, Stanley Turntine, uh, Phyllis Hyman, and then one time Stanley Clark was the fourth artist, and all these different shows. So I got to play with a lot of these great artists, just being a musical director, and so that's how I met Stanley Clark, is because he came on the show doing but he would just do a solo bass thing.
Hmm.
He didn't have a band at the time, and he would just come out and play 30 minutes by himself. And so
Really?
we would just stay off stage, and he would play, and then we'd play with the other artists, whoever was on the show that time. A lot of great artists. But there one night he just said, "Hey guys, come on up, we're gonna jam." So we all came up with him on one night, and we just jammed something on A, you know, whatever. He just started playing, and we just jammed for 10 minutes, and so that became a regular thing. And then we started learning School Days, of course. People wanted to hear School Days, so we started playing that. And then on the side, he started getting a little more tours and stuff. So he asked me to join his band and just do some gigs and tours with him, along with Jimmy Earl. So Jimmy Earl played low bass, Stanley played high bass, and then he got his old buddy Jerry Brown, that's on the School Days record, to come play drums, and that was like the band. And so that's how I got the Stanley Clark gig. I didn't audition or anything. He just asked me to come,
Hmm.
and I just like, oh yeah, I'll do it. And so I was out doing that, and then we did this really huge tour in Europe in 1987, and that's where I met Allan Holdsworth, because but there's a little backstory to that, because I so Stanley called me up one day. He said, "Hey, Steve, let's listen. I have this huge 2.5 month tour, 10-week tour going through Europe, every country in Europe." And
So that was your break then. So
that was the thing. Yeah, but I had 3 small kids then. Me and my wife, we had all like an infant, like just born, and a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and so I told Stanley, I'm like, I need to check with my wife because, like, out of the house for just leaving her with like 3 small kids for 2.5 months is like a terrible thing to do to your wife, like. He goes, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "I understand. So let me just talk to her to see if we can work something out with the family members, babysitters, and all that." He goes, "Oh yeah, I understand. Just let me know and everything." I said, "Okay, I'll definitely." And then he goes, "Oh, and by the way, Allan Holdsworth is opening up for us on the whole tour." And I just said, "Well, he's going to be on tour with you?" He goes, "Yeah, he's going to open up all the concerts for the 2.5 months." I'm like, "He's going to travel with us?" He's like, "Yeah." And I just go, "Oh, yeah. Hey, listen, Stan, I can do the tour. No problem." And he goes, don't you need to talk to your wife?" I'm like, "She's going to be okay with it." I was a huge Holdsworth fan.
So you were into his music by then.
I mean, like, me and my friend here in Boston, Bruce Bartlett, we used to get together all the time and just like go through an IOU record and road games and just try to like figure out what Allan was doing, and yeah, so like, yeah, so I went on tour. I just told him, "Hey, Gina, guess what I'm doing?" She's like, "Have fun," So,
Great.
but that's where I met Allan, and then we got to be good friends. And then the way it came about was since we were the headliners, all my keyboards would be set up. And Allan, I don't know if you remember that period. It was like 1986. When he first got the 1985, he did a Tavakron record. If you know that record,
that one.
And that's when he started using the syntax. So of course, on the records, when say like Non Brood and Looking Glass and all that, when he would go to the syntax solo or to a guitar solo, he would have chords for all of the songs, But when they toured with it, it sounded really funny just to have a synth lead and then bass and drums. There was no chords. So what they did is they recorded on one side of a cassette track, they recorded the chords for the solo section. And on the other side of the cassette track was a tambourine from the beginning of the song to the end of the song. So Chad Wackerman had to start the cassette and he had to count off, and then they had to do the song the exact same way every night. And,
That's impossible.
And if they got off by a beat before the solo section, the chords would be wrong, So Chad hated it because he had a really he couldn't get off, They couldn't do it, and the guys in the band didn't hear only Chad heard the tambourine, so he had to keep everything, and they really hated it. So they were doing that. So about a week into that tour with Stanley, Allan said, he goes, "Man, I often hate this effing cassette, man." Like, he goes, would you come up and play the chords during the solos? I'm like, "Yeah." So I said, "Yeah," because I was coming to his set everything just to check him out. And so he wrote out some little scratch things. I figured out we had a rehearsal during the sound check. And then I played maybe 4 tunes with him on their set, and Looking Glass and a few other tunes. And so and Allan loved the fact that I was an Oberheim guy. So I had all my Oberheims and DX7 because that's what he was using, Oberheims and DX7s. And so I had all those same sounds and then so for the rest of the 8-9 weeks, I played in both bands. So I opened up with Allan playing all those tunes, and then I played with Stanley, So it was it was really cool. I had to push myself, And then about halfway through the tour, Allan, I used to do my sound check. I used to play this tune called Joshua that I wrote, and it's actually on one of Allan's record. And so he came up to me one day. He goes, "Hey, I like that tune that you played during sound check." He goes, "What is that?" I said, "Oh, it's a tune I wrote called Joshua after my son." And I played. He goes, "I love that." He goes, and then he came up later. He goes, "Hey, can I record that on my next record?" I was like, whoa, yeah, that would be awesome, And then by the end of the tour, he said, hey, listen, I have this tour coming up in the fall of '87, and it'd be great if you just come on tour with us and do your thing. I'm like,
Okay.
yeah. I was like, I'm in, like I was like, let me think about it. Sure, yeah, I can do it. I didn't check with my wife again either. I just told her like that. I mean, this is Allan Holdsworth. You
Yeah.
got to do it, So
Can you give us a little insight in Allan Holdsworth music? How is it charted out? How is it structured? Is everything fixed, or is it kind of pattern like organized, or what exactly
it,
is it?
well, it is really different. But I think the one maybe I never asked him, but maybe the reason he liked what I did with his music, like because I related to his music. I related to the fact that things weren't set up in just always strict 4/4/8 measure things. If you know his music, he'll have one measure with an extra beat, or another measure with extra 2 beats, or sometimes a beat and a half,
Hmm.
and then the anticipation becomes the downbeat. It's very. But it all felt really natural to me. And in fact, when I was a student at Berklee, I used to write for this teacher I had, a great teacher, Dave Mash, who was responsible for writing the letters so I could get a job at Berklee. He was my teacher. And for our harmony class, I would have to write songs. And so I wrote, these forms, and it would be A, and then the next A would be different, little. And then I would write, you have to have an AAB tune. You went to Berklee, it's like write an AAB tune, it's like standard. But mine was never. Then my second A would have 10 measures instead of 8, and then it would go to the B section, but it would be like 11 measures, and then maybe a 2/4 measure in there. And then when I get back to the A, it would not be the original A; it would be something different, And Dave loved it, but he goes, I love this, but can you just write a normal 32 bar AABA tune? I'm like, oh, I don't know, I'll try, and so I guess I just like the idea of like the time to kind of flow and just and if you know Alan's music, that's the way his music is. It's just there's extra measures, there's an extra beat, there's a less of a beat, And I asked him about that, and he said. He goes, I don't know. You get to a harmony and it has to hold that, and then it goes. I'm like, okay. so that's how we would learn it. He didn't write any charts, so no charts were written.
No charts.
Nothing.
Oh
Yeah.
my God! You had to learn all that by heart, or what?
Yeah. Everything was well. So the stuff that were on previous albums, I'd have to go learn it from the albums the best I could. Like
Did
that
you play
melody.
along with them? What was your method? Did you just play along with the albums, or what?
Well,
What did you do?
yeah. So if there was a new song, like he brought in a new song, we had like Tullio was written after I joined the band. It's an amazing form, like unbelievably hard song with just a crazy solo form. It's so long and changes. But by the way, do you know that song Tullio? It's on I think it's on the Hard Hat Area album.
Hmm.
And he he told me when he started writing that song, he wanted to write a song like Protocosmos, like the Alan Pasquale song, which had a little melody, da 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 da, and then it had like, if you know Protocosmos, it has like maybe 5 chords sequence or something, maybe 6. I don't know. It just goes and goes to another chord, and then it keeps cycling like a really short, and you just solo and solo. So when he started writing Tulo, he said that was his concept. He was going to write a little head, and then he just wanted to have like a short sequence. So this kind of gets into his mind, like how he composes. He said he goes, but I started writing it, and then he said it just kept going, and it just kept going, and then it kept going. And if you know that form, I could show you my cheat sheet on that. The solo form is just insane. I mean, it goes through a first ending, then it comes back, and there's different stuff when it comes back, like different chords and an extra beat. And then it goes to the second kind of ending thing with stuff, and then it goes back to this other section, and then it comes to this kind of third ending and back around, and then it's like a roadmap, the chart, and then it finally gets
intuitive. Okay.
yeah, and it finally gets to this melody he was talking about at the end of the first solo form. It goes to this melody, and it's just on F major 7 and A minor, I think, and it's this really simple melody. So he stuck to that. But when he started writing the chords for the solo, it just kept going and going, and I think that's his method of composing is like it's like storytelling. So he started telling a story, and then it just kept growing and growing, and then finally got to an ending point for him, and that's there's the story, So lesser minds like myself, I would have just gone, okay, there's 5 chords, all right, let's put it together, let's do it. But this kind of genius, he can't. It's like Beethoven with the Ninth Symphony. He couldn't just finish something; it just kept going, And Allan's like that, got that kind of mind, so his harmony just kept going, and it led to this, and that led to this, and it told this story, and it came out, and then finally there's this melody, do 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 da, boo do da, boo da do da, do da da. That's the melody for that song. The rest of the song is like this giant solo section. So anyway, when he'd have to teach it to me, he would just come to my keyboards and he would just play one chord at a time, and I would kind of figure out what I thought it was, because guitar players, it's like you only play 4 notes sometimes 3, or like maybe some other thing with, it's not even the bass note, it's like this.
Right.
And so I have to look at it and I go, oh, it looks like A flat Lydian to me. I don't know. So I put A flat Lydian, and then the next voicing, okay, that looks like a D sus with a flat 9. I don't know, And then there were some chords where I couldn't really give a name to. I don't know. It was just like these series of notes. So you would see on my chart just like letters written on top of each other with a slash and some kind of bass note. And so I'd have a chord symbol, and then I have these letters. I'm like, I have to play that voicing, And then and so it would just go through all that. And if you see my charts, there's no bar lines or time signatures or anything. It's just one. You just see a chord and a chord and a chord, and then but within that is rhythms and time changes and form. And that stuff I would just memorize, because.
Okay, so you didn't really count it.
Yeah, exactly. So there was no. The counting thing was a very strange thing, but I really loved the way it worked out, because Allan would just play it. He goes, "Oh, this is how I want this section to go." He'd play, and he would play and play, and this and that, and this and this, and then this, and we say, "Oh, do that again," and then you can see Gary Husband was like thinking it through, and then I was frantically counting, and then I'd put down what I thought the timing was, and Gary would have his. So one time I went and asked Gary about like a timing thing, like how he thought about it, and then he goes, "Oh," and he started describing it, and it really confused me. I said, like, you know what, never mind, and I just counted it the way I counted it, Well, in the end, the way I counted Allan's music was, if rhythms were less than a half note, in any kind, you can feel those, right? So you can go, boo ba doo da dee ga dee go boo ba doo dee dee, but now there's a space.
How long is it?
Right.
How long is that space?
Exactly. And so like now I have to. That's when I start counting. Okay, there's 2.5 beats or something, and then
yeah.
And so if anything was longer than a half note, I would count it. So looking glasses like that. Biga ga goo. Don't have to count. 1, 2, 3. Da do ga. 1, 2, 3. Don't have to count. There's some rhythms you don't have to count. You just play, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I really love that fact. So there was no charts with written out rhythms at all. And I just figured out when I was supposed to do stuff just by using this method. And so when I would come back off these tours and I'd come to Boston, like, Berklee and Boston is all about charts. So people would give you charts with all these rhythms, and I got really bad at reading charts with rhythms. And I would just try to get the artist to say, hey, can you just play that for me? Because I just wanted to hear how it sounded. I didn't want to read it.
Right.
And then later, when this a few years ago, when I went and played with Allan again, and then sadly he passed away, and then we did some reunion, or we did sort of like memorial concerts, and then I think it was a Virgil or somebody had written out a bunch of charts for Allan's music, and so I had to go find all my cheat sheets, which has very little information for me at all. 20 years later, and I had to like what did I mean by this? You know, like I don't.
So you compared it.
Yeah, like I couldn't even figure out my own scribble stuff, you know. And then so I would look at these charts, and then they were Virgil or so whoever figured out like the timing of it, but I couldn't comprehend like where they were. So I had a tough time going back learning the tunes, looking at what most people would look at with charts, because I was like, I don't think I counted it like that. So seeing like anticipations in the middle of a measure was like really weird for me, you know, and stuff like that. So, but I think it was a really organic way of learning music and knowing how that music is performed, you know. And I don't know how Allan, I mean, he never really talked about it much. He would just kind of play what it was, and we never really talked about much at all about the music, you know. Even scales, I tried to get him to like tell me like, how, you know, how are you thinking about scales on these things? Like, oh, you know, just a few of these and that, you know. And then that's all he would never tell me. He goes, okay. Oh, I just kind of run along here and there, you know.
Because there's this famous video he did. Like he did this instruction video, right, where you play on it, right?
Oh yeah, that was.
Do you remember that one? And he explains all the scales, right?
Yeah.
He has names for the scales, right? Which is like, I don't know, X, O, or whatever. This is melodic minor, and so but he didn't really talk about that, right? So he never talked about that.
Well, I mean, what I learned early on, because since I was trained like through Berklee and just basic that kind of knowledge of jazz harmony and stuff, I would have to, whatever he would tell me and would show me, I would have to translate back into my language. So we'd be talking about the same thing. It's actually, and I started using that method that he does a little bit, because what he does is he simplifies it. So if you have 3 or 4 chords in a row, different chord names, but they all share the same basic 7 notes, there's no sense in putting, if you're soloing it, there's no sense in putting 4 chords and learning 4 different scales, especially on guitar, I guess, because the way the guitar is laid out. Piano is different. You can kind of see. So I can see an A flat Lydian, and then I can see an F Dorian, and then I can see a C Aeolian or something, right? It's all the same notes, but so because I can see that root, I can see where they kind of fall. But on guitar, he just sees it up and down the neck, I guess. And so if a progression was A flat Lydian to C Aeolian to G Phrygian to E Ionian, it was once he would just put.
His chords are non-functional, right? So that works perfectly well.
So he would just put his symbol for F Dorian. So he put F, and I think it's an X, something like that, FX, and that's Dorian scale to him. And then he would just put a slash, because the next chord, whatever it is that same set of notes, and then the next one. And then if a new scale came about, he would have the scale, his name for that scale. It didn't always relate to the name of the chord or the bass note that Jimmy or Schooley would play, right? In fact, a lot of his songs, when he wrote them, he didn't have bass notes in mind a lot of times. So he would show me the voicings, and I would put down what I thought it was, and then he would go to the bass player, and then he would play those voicings, and then he would ask Jimmy, like, what root do you want to put to that?
Okay.
And then Jimmy would figure out, I like that. I like this root. And now, oh, nice. I like that too. You know, like
that's so interesting.
That's interesting that he doesn't think from the root.
No, it's just he thinks just from the scale. So he has a scale pattern, and then he has voicings within it, and then he lets the bass player come up with whatever bass note he wants, So Jimmy would just come up with these incredible notes, and and Jimmy is amazing because his favorite bass player is Chris Squire, who came up with the Yes, who came up with amazing bass notes to like folk songs, like Yes. I was a big Yes fan, so I couldn't wait till I got my first Yes book, and it had because I wanted to know what those chords those guys were playing. I'm like, this is amazing. And I got my first Yes book, and I opened it up to one of their songs, and I see the chord changes up there, and it's like D, A, D, E minor, D. I'm like, this can't be, It turns out the reason they're interesting is because of what Chris Squire did to him, right? He's not playing those notes. He's playing other notes, and Jimmy, I think he thinks the same way, And the 2 tracks he plays on my record, you can hear Jimmy. I have this one tune that he played on with Chad, and the progression in this one section of the solo is just E minor to C Lydian, E minor to C Lydian. So it's like 2 different scales, but basically they're similar, And it is nothing at all. But when you listen to what Jimmy, these notes that he played to it, so I had a thing. I said, thanks for making my progression sound much more interesting, because he puts these other notes to it and he's playing some different stuff. But my voicings are just E minor 9, C Lydian, E minor. It's about the basic 2 fusion chords you can come up with, But if you listen to it, you're like, wow, nice harmony. And I said, well, you have to thank Jimmy Johnson for that, because and so that's the way that's the way Allan would have these tunes, So one quick story on that, like when we did the Wardenclyffe Tower album.
I hate jazz. That was
The toilet flush, and then what is this stuff?
That's amazing.
That was so, Allan loved it. He was such a funny guy,
Yeah.
He loved that fact, like, what is? And that was a friend of his out in L.A. that he liked, like a surfer dude. He's like, hey, what is this stuff, Jazz, right in the middle of my solo and jazz. It was the funniest thing. But when I recorded on the tracks that I played on that album, the only thing I played to was a weird drum machine that Allan put together with no bar lines. It was just this weird beat. And then Allan's synth chords that he had. There was no guitar, no drums, no bass, and he just had these synth chords. And then, so I had to figure out what the voicings like what I was telling you. And then I was able to, then I put my chart together what they were, But what really scared me was like, I kind of came up with my chord, and then I figured out scales I wanted to play over those voicings, right? But it wasn't until later, after we did that stuff, that he took it to the studio, and Jimmy Johnson and Chad or Gary played drums on it. And I was thinking, like, what if Jimmy comes up with a whole different bass note that changes the scale? And I was like, it's gonna sound like I'm playing wrong stuff, So I was really scared about that because we didn't talk. It was sort of done in a weird kind of different piece thing. It was back in the '80s, so it wasn't as convenient as now with like internets. But we were able to do at different times and record different things. So I stayed in Allan's studio and I just did my stuff over these voicings really, and I would play, and I didn't know what the bass notes were going to be. And Jimmy came, but in the end, I remember listening to him. Like in the end, I guess I made lucky choices because it came out okay. Yeah. Our Jimmy, I'm sure he's got great ears, so he probably just listens. He goes, "Oh, this is going to fit with what Steve and Allan are doing." So, so anyway, so it's it's a really, I mean, it's a great question. It's you probably do a whole 2 or 3 shows on like Allan's music and his construction and how we learned it. And I really just love that way of learning though. I mean, with 4 guys, it's fairly easy to do that. If you have more guys or more parts, it's probably not that easy to do. Yeah. So I can't imagine Return to Forever doing it that way. Right. I think Chick wrote out charts and everything. Of course. But Stanley told me though, when I was playing with Stanley, he told me that Lenny White, he couldn't read a score at all. He didn't know how to read. He was just a player. And so he told me that the way they all if you know Romantic Warrior, it's such a complicated compositions on every tune. And he said that that Lenny White had a system. So they would teach him the first section, and Lenny would play. So, okay, they would go to this next section, and they would teach the whole composition in section. They would play it for him, and he'd get it. And he said Lenny never forgot the first second. It was in. So once he got to the end of it, he knew the whole thing.
Wow.
And then he never made a mistake. It's like,
oh,
I think Buddy Rich was sort of like that too. Couldn't read a note, and he learned all those big band charts.
Yeah.
And Allan told me that he had that. He kind of had that same skill. So when he did all that Bill Bruford and Jean Leponte stuff and all this written out stuff, that he learned it like. And he's like once I heard it and I played, it was there. But he said he lost that skill when he started his own band. And then so later on, because there was he wrote all the tunes, so there was no need to have that really intense skill of like taking things in and then just keeping it because he wrote it. I wrote it. So
a lot of non-readers are like that. They have great ears and they have great memory because they have to, of course.
It was a skill they had to have, So
and a lot of good readers have bad memory.
Bad memory.
I realized that.
It's true. Yeah. So I'm somewhere in the middle because I keep up my reading with classical and stuff, but I really like that. The way we did it with Allan, it's just, and I would just have my cheat sheets with if I needed stuff like soloing over House of Mirrors, if you know that tune. That is such a complicated solo section that I'd have to have a little cheat sheet right there just to get through that harmony, So it's just beautiful harmony. So I'm revisiting a lot of that music. I don't know if I'll put out a solo piano thing, but I'm revisiting it like just for solo piano.
Wow.
I played that stuff back then, but I never really fully analyzed it and delved into it like I was. And recently I did I don't know if you saw the video I did of
a solo recording of
Sphere of Innocence. Do you know that tune?
Yes, absolutely.
And I did a solo version. I recorded a solo version.
Beautiful Steinway. Yeah, it sounds.
That's
great.
That's on that piano. Yeah, it's beautiful. And I actually did that. I played that on the record, the solo section in the chord. But I went back and I really analyzed it for this. I had to for the solo piano, and really, it's an amazing composition. I mean, like on the level of Brahms and Beethoven and Stravinsky. I mean, when you start seeing how things are related and what he did to the harmony here and how he got to this harmony and where it wound up. And then in the solos, it's, that little theme, it happens often. You keep hearing it, but it's always somewhere else. It's a different harmony.
Okay. What's Allan Holdsworth's background? Is he a classical player from his roots, or is he self-taught? What's his?
I think kind of. I think his dad, his dad, who was he called him dad. It was his granddad, but his dad was a piano player, and I think he taught him how to play guitar from the perspective of being a piano player. Mm-hmm. So that may be some insight on how Allan thought about the guitar, because he learned from his dad who played piano. So his dad, although he didn't play guitar, he said he learned the neck of the guitar, so he could teach Allan about how voicings worked. Yeah. And his dad was a more traditional jazz player, and this may be why a lot of Allan's voicings are drop two voicings. If you know about drop two, like a lot of Allan's voicings, those beautiful voicings he played, a lot of it's based around drop two.
It's quite natural on guitar, I think.
And it may be natural on guitar, and that is a traditional voicing that the older piano players used a lot, and the band writers for the arrangers for Stan Kenton, and they would write this drop two or drop four kind of is a technique of writing, and that drop two is a really beautiful voicing, especially on guitar, And I guess if it follows real easy there, so that may be a reason why he has a lot of that kind of stuff, A lot of Allan's voicings and his progressions are, even though they don't sound normal, they're actually very traditional. Like if you listen to Mr. Barewell, that whole intro, dee da dum, bo da dee, do do dee do be gum gum. If you, because I learned that and I played it at a live concert, just a solo thing, and it turns out the whole thing is just dominant to tonic. But the way he does it, you don't know that. And I'm like, what is this stuff? And I realized the whole thing is just, I mean, it's Beethoven. It's very traditional, you know. And I know he didn't go to school or he didn't take private lessons, so I'm not sure where he got that knowledge. If it was just innate, or he, you know, I know he studied on his own a lot, you know, and he studied harmony and how he, you know, he developed his own kind of way of discussing it and analyzing it. But a lot of traditional stuff is there. That's what I'm learning. I didn't know that back then, but I'm learning now. There, a lot of the stuff is tension and release, just like classical music. It's just dominant at the time, tension and release. And so a lot of times Allan's progressions would flow in a tension release kind of manner. But the cool thing about Allan, I've realized from learning that tune, is sometimes his releases have more tension sounds in it than actually the tension. But if you look at it, it's actually the release. But he'll put, for example, like as the guitar you play, you know how he plays a triad, right? But then he'll put a flat 9 between a 3 and 4 somewhere in his triad. So that would be the release chord. You know, it'd be like something to C, but he has an E, and then he has that flat 9 up above it, and that's his release. But it sounds more tension than the so it was
kind of resolve again and again and again.
Yeah, it's like traditional resolution. So he has and he does things in that kind of group, like the song I love to play all the time, the Funnels. It's kind of like that. Be da da dee da be da dum, and then be da 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 ba bo dum bum. That is, it's like 2 sections of harmony that has sort of a question and an answer with a tension and release and tension release. It's very traditional writing, you know. And now I'm learning, as I'm studying, I'm learning about that. I didn't know then, you know. It just sounds like kind of weird. So it's really interesting how now that and he never talked about it before, and even if I asked him, he would talk about bicycles or how to make beer or something, you know, something other than harmony and chords and scales. So, but now I'm learning a lot of this. I'm learning along with everybody else, you know. So again,
but I'm sure it must have influenced you also as a composer, probably, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. So, well, like I said, I had some of that kind of probably from listening to his music from IOU and all that stuff. I had some of that built in. Like when I wrote Joshua, I was thinking of a little bit of a cross between Temporary Fault and David Sanchez tune called Again, I think it is. It's sort of a combination of those two things. So sort of a progressive rock thing to like with this Holdsworth thing, and that tune has that kind of Holdsworth kind of construction to it, where there's a 6/4 measure and there's a 5/4 measure, and there's no real key center. That tune's not in the key of anything, right? It just starts and the harmony flows. So that was the other thing about Allan's music. There's no real true key center. You know, it starts. I mean, I don't know how to describe that, but you can't really put it to a key center. But the harmony fits. You know, it makes sense. You know, so I'm not sophisticated.
It always feels like a kaleidoscope somehow. He's blurred the boundaries so much that you can't tell where you are in the song.
He would send me like cassette tapes of like just the chords of some new tune, you know. He would send, hey, I want to do this tune, and he would send it, and he would go, and when it comes back around again, that's where you're going to solo, and then it would take me forever, like listening and listening.
Figure out when it comes around again.
and I would just have them like, is this? No, this is it. And it was like, I didn't know. It was so hard. You just like, oh yeah, when that form comes around again, you'll solo, and then it was just like, and then eventually you start hearing it, and you're like, oh yeah, it's like a kaleidoscope. You start seeing the patterns, and you go, oh yeah, there it is. But it would take me a long time. And then I'd probably have to ask him like, okay, where does that start again? But it was beautiful to work with him like on that stuff. And I mean, he's just on a different level from anybody else.
Right.
So I just had to kind of hold on to my seat and hope for the best,
Right.
Just go and see what happens. But he was nice enough to like my playing and have me around for a while. And I enjoyed it. It was a great time. And I learned a lot from him, just being on stage and seeing how he ran that band and how he interacted with musicians and then his music too, to answer your question, it definitely influenced me a lot, like that. And, I think most musicians we have, I have influence from the classical part of my side and the rock part of my side and the fusion side and the jazz, everything kind of, and Allan was definitely a big part of that, definitely.
I have to ask you one thing. Isn't it a lot of pressure to have a guy like Gary Husband in the band looking over your shoulder as a keyboard player?
Oh, a lot of pressure, you said. Pressure. Oh,
I mean, he's an intimidating keyboard player, isn't he?
I mean, people don't understand the pressure I was in. But first of all, I had to follow Allan Holdsworth solo and take a solo. That's incredible pressure right there. Actually, I was in a no-win situation because either I soloed first and then Allan would solo. It would just be like, oh my God. Or Allan would solo. He would solo, and then I had to follow that. I'm like, oh my God. So it was, it's good. It's good competition, so it was a good thing. And, but yeah, to also know that the drummer in the band knows as much or even more about keyboards and harmony and playing than I do. Like that's pretty intimidating, So it was, I knew that all the time that whatever voicing I played or pattern or that Gary knew every little. I mean, not too many drummers know that, right? You can kind of get a few things around most people, but not with Gary. So every once in a while he would give me a really nice compliment, and those meant so much because I knew that he was really listening and he heard everything harmonically and scale wise that I did, So it was great. And Gary he listened to everything you did, and he would never give up. Like if you wanted to take an extra course, even after 3 or 4, if you wanted to have another go at it around, he would be there right with you, and he would just always, he would just go and he would, and he would just go and always fall, just he gives you enough to work with to play, and then he's doing, and plus he's listening and supporting and then giving. I can see why Allan just loved that guy so much, and all those drummers. Chad was the same way, and he just and Vinny, when Vinny came on the road with us, he
Mr. Something is Wrong says, thank you for the great interview. Very interesting.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, great. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Now we talked so much about Allan Holdsworth. We really have to talk about your music.
Oh yeah.
And
That's
because it's
okay.
I keep listening to that Connections album since you agreed to come to the show, because I can't put it down. It's really amazing.
Actually, guys, why don't we save that for another time? Because we talked about an hour and 11 minutes already. I'd really like to discuss some of your.
Yeah, I can go back. That was just real quick. That was a project that I had in my mind for a lot of years. In fact, the idea was to get Allan to play on Carry On and another song, and he wanted to do it, but it just sadly never happened. But it was just something I had, and some tunes, and I had this idea of just pulling it back. As you get older, you kind of look back in your life, and I'd played with so many great musicians that I respected and just I was in awe of, and I just went, since I have my own studio here and my own kind of thing, I really wanted to pull a lot of these people together. So I don't know if it was because of the COVID thing or just it just kind of started happening. And Jimmy Johnson is really sort of the catalyst that kind of got the thing going, because he I asked him about it, and he's like, "Yeah, send me stuff, send it to me." And I'm like, "Okay." So I started with him on that tune, Carry On, and Quantum, the Quantum Entanglement, and he started the whole thing, and then from there it just kind of snowballed into all the other artists, and everybody was so sweet and nice. Like I would just text him or call him up, and like Billy Cobham, he was towards the end, and I played with Billy for just like 6 months in the 80s, 85. And so I contacted him. I said, "Hey, Billy, remember me?" He's like, "Yeah, how's it going?" So I said, "I have this tune, and I have this project. I would love for you to just get on board." And he said, "Yeah." So I sent him the track. So everybody was like that. Vinny and all the bass players. Jimmy Haslip was just amazing. And everybody was just, Chad did a couple of things. And the last band that we played with, Allan, Virgil, and Evan Marion, we did that.
I mean, it's kind of a creme de la creme record, right?
Everybody, I know. I listen. I have to pinch myself. I'm like, how did I get all these people to agree to do this? And everybody was so happy to do it. And I mean, it did cost me a little bit of money, but I had to finally show the bill to my wife.
That's short.
I can't believe my wife is still with me after all that stuff. And now I'm like, "Hey, the album's done. Now, how much did it cost you?" It wasn't so bad. You just may have to do a few hours overtime. That's all. So, but it was well worth it, and all the guys were just fantastic. And so we can get together again, and we can kind of go through the tunes, and I can talk about how I was composing them and different aspects of the connections thing with all the people there. So. They all have a connection. Some of them are new, like the percussionist that played on a couple of tracks. He was in his Joe Zawinul band. I just found him online. I'm like, I need to know this guy. I love the way he orchestrated with percussion, and he was just amazing. Like that guy is just Jorge is his name. He just like the way when he sent back his tracks, I was just amazed at how he orchestrated the percussions on First Creation and on the first track. I forget the name.
Now's the time.
Yeah, now's the time. Yeah. The way he orchestrated all that percussion on multiple tracks. It was just amazing. So it was really amazing to do, and I got it all done like in a year and a half. And so I'm glad you're enjoying it, and people seem to enjoy it. I got all these great players and some of the tunes, like the First Creation, I wrote when I was a student at Berklee.
Oh, really? You did?
Yeah, that's why I used to play with Victor Bailey. That's why I dedicated that Victor, because he used to play that, and he was a funny guy. He used to that bass line goes do da do da do da do da do da. He used to, so Victor came up with lyrics like First Creation, what a sensation. First Creation, boogie round the nation.
Very memorable.
And he would just laugh, we'd like, but and then 2 years later, after we used to play that song, he was in the Weather Report band. I kind of wrote that, kind of mimicking some Weather Report kind of thing when I was a kid. I wrote that, and then Victor played it, and then Victor wound up in Weather Report, and I wanted him to play on this track too. There was plans to get him to play, and sadly that never happened either. So, but Evan came in and just totally killed the whole thing and played a great solo. So anyway, we can talk about all that stuff later. But this is a blast, talking shop. I don't hope I didn't bore anybody.
Oh, it was so interesting, Stephen. And we could keep on going forever, because it's there's not only Connections, but all the other albums you did, like in recent years. It would be
Beyond Turbines with Roberto and Biase and Virgil. That was a great album. And I've been doing a lot of producing here in my studio. You can see my studio here. It's all a mess, right. But this is where I live most of the time.
Yeah.
And my wife has to text me every once in a while just to make sure. Are you in the studio? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm still over here. Take out the trash when you come back, So.
You know what? When you at the beginning you talked about Bruce Bartlett and you checking out stuff, right? Because I studied with Bruce for a long time, and
He's great, yeah.
you know, I had this crazy idea. Maybe at some point we can even do this, and Bruce would also show.
Oh, yeah, that'd be a blast.
That would be just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have some great stories with Bruce. Like the first time I met him, he came to one of my gigs, and he came up to me and he was like, so he was nervous talking to me. He's like, hey Steve, and I guess I was a real jerk because I said, hey, hold on a second, and I left, and he said I never came back. So like, hey, yeah, hold that thought, and I just left. He still ribs me about that to this day, you know. And we go way back to the early '80s, and we've been together ever since and playing and learning. I go to his house still and just go and we just jam for a bunch of times.
Wow.
He's such a great guy, and I produced a couple of his records and mixed them, and I played on a couple of. So there's the whole thing about connections, you know. The whole thing everything is just connected, and
Exactly.
I love that whole concept, you know. And
Oh yeah.
so a little bit of all of those people are in you, you know, and then
Yeah.
and it continues on, you know. So to my students, and hopefully they pass that on and in some way or form. So I love that whole concept.
Exactly.
Of course.
Beautiful.
There's a great trumpet player with us tonight, Gil Kaup. You might know the guy. I think he's in Vegas at the time.
Yeah.
He says, "Hey guys, Gil chiming in." Gilbert Kaup.
Oh,
that's nice to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, will this also be up on like a YouTube link? I can share
Exactly. So I can send you something if you
Okay.
want. Yeah. That would be great. Yeah.
That would be wonderful. And it's so great to see you guys. I think we talked earlier. I think the last time I saw you was 10 years ago or something, and it was in Salzburg or something.
At least,
Okay.
yeah. So, but I remember that. Yeah, that was funny. And we recorded at your place.
Yeah.
Remember with
and your beautiful wife, who was my student, you know.
exactly.
So it's great.
Actually, we planned on coming to Boston actually last year.
Oh, and then the whole thing. Yeah.
But of course, it didn't happen. So hopefully, at some point, we can come, because we haven't been to Boston for over 10 years now.
Wow. Yeah,
I would love to go back. And
Berklee is growing like a weed, or it's huge. They taking over that whole Back Bay area. It's like great, but it's really great. I enjoy teaching there and all that stuff. So
I bet. And you're such a popular teacher there.
Oh,
you know.
Thanks.
From
Thanks for saying. I just I go to my room and I just, you know, I try to stay out of trouble, and and I enjoy all the students. It's just a great, you know, even the students who are just starting off with jazz. They're just learning their chords. I love teaching them. They're so excited about being able to put like a 9 or even a 7th on a chord, or playing, you know, and I love that excitement. It's like, wow, that sounds amazing, you know. And then I have students, like very advanced students, like my good friend Edvard Lee or Casimir, who's I think he's in Belgium. Great player, and we would have a lot of great times just discussing music and on the more complex side. So I love the whole thing, and I love teaching there, and it's been a treat and an honor to work with all the students. So anyway, yeah.
Great, really, yeah.
So anyway, you know, keep enjoying the record, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Yes. I mean, we will try to let anybody hear your record. So
yeah, thank you.
We have to bring fusion forward, right?
Yeah, fusion is not dead yet. And if it was ever, I don't know if it was ever alive.
Not at all. Not at all. It's got more following now than 10 years ago, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
And
that fusion style has like made its way into other stuff. You know, it's like you know, Robert Glasper. He was like kind of mixing that kind of jazz fusion into the neo soul, and it's kind of all more. I love it. It always continues. So.
Yeah. There's also a lot of kind of acoustic fusion, and I think in Europe it started with Esbjørn Svensson.
Oh, okay.
EST. Yeah. That's kind of acoustic fusion, right?
Yeah.
Fusion,
maybe. Yeah.
Translated to a piano trio.
I mean, and then New York has a thing going on, and it's like, yeah, it's the whole thing is great. So I try to stay up with what I can. I'm an old guy now, but I try to stay with all the new things. And students actually, they turn me on to all kinds of new things. Like, check this out, you know. And,
yeah, like Pliny. Do you know Pliny?
yeah.
You heard Pliny?
So anyway, so yeah, I'm enjoying life. So anyway, well, it was a blast talking to you guys. And
Steve, thank you so much for doing this. It was so great, really, to hear all this stuff. And I hope we can come back and do something at some point. That would be really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be my pleasure. Yeah. So thanks for doing the show and
yes,
spreading the word.
Glad to have you here, and enjoy your day. So you still have some. Still daylight.
Still daylight here. And in fact, I have a few online students. One from Seattle or Vancouver, and then one from China, and then one that's living in Boston now. So
wow.
So I still have some students left tonight to do.
I see.
and all that. So it's
cool.
Really good. I'm glad to be able to, with this technology, be able to still do that. You know. So,
right. Yeah, me too. I'm also here and teaching online. So
yeah, it's a great way to connect. You know.
Oh yeah.
Connection. We got the connection.
That's it.
So,
thank you so much, Steve.
All right. Well, thanks so much, and you guys take care. And thanks to everybody out there. Appreciate it.
Cool.
All right. I'll talk to you guys.